Elizabeth, so much for the time. I really appreciate the chance to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, Absolutely. Be Still is a fascinating piece. It is just a beautiful, beautiful film. Um,
Thank you.
how did you get involved in this? Why did you want to step into Hannah's world?
Well, I actually became fascinated with her. Can you hear me? Because I'm
Yep.
hearing. Okay. I became fascinated with her over 20 years ago now. Um, yeah, when I recently came to Canada, I went to film school in Toronto at York University, and I wanted to know more about Canadian art because um, I came from Latvia. So, so yeah, I just really wanted to know more about Canadian culture. And back then, we already had internet, but I just literally was at York's library. Literally, I went to the Canadian art section in the library and started browsing through books because I was like a very visual person. And I, by chance, absolutely by chance, I found a book um, about Hannah and her photographs. So, and then I saw like all these amazing self-portraits was like double, I don't know, triple, quadruple. And there's like kids that look like sculptures, and all of this is made in 1880s, 1890s on a glass plate. So I really wanted to know more about it. And I made a short film about her right after I graduated film school. And then I told myself that I'll also make a feature film about her at some point. And it took me like 17 years to do it, but I did it.
It honestly, it's very beautiful in the way that it's created, and honestly, um, this is the first time I've heard of Hannah. Like in the history of surrealism photography, her story, I don't know how well known it is, to be fair.
It's known,
It
not known.
what is it about Hannah that's so special, and why don't we know about her?
Um, well, I think it's because she was creating, I believe, according to my research, I believe that she was the first kind of like surrealist photographer. Um, I think it's because, and she might have been actually the first selfie photographer, which is kind of also interesting. But it's because she was making those I think really interesting self-portraits because especially back then, photography wasn't new, but it was still kind of, it wasn't really seen much of an art. I think it was more of a craft, like you would go and you have your portraits done and maybe like do some panoramic views, but it wasn't necessarily seen as as something to create art as of yet. So the fact that she kind of put some artistic and experimental thought into it, I think that's quite fascinating. And the reason I think she's not really still not known or acknowledged, I think that's unfortunately is still the plight of many women pioneers, and she was definitely a pioneer. Um, yeah, but hopefully there's a little bit of a change, and women's work is being acknowledged a little bit more, but it's we still have a long way to go. So I'm really glad that I was able to make this film.
What was it like stepping into Hannah's mind? Because I mean, this film is so much the power of this film is embedded in its visual style. And
Mhm.
wondering from your perspective, how what was it like to bring Hannah's unique way of seeing the world into the film?
Um, it's definitely interpretive. So because like I couldn't talk with her,
Of course.
and also there just isn't much research about her life per se. But like all of her work is in BC archives, and she did have some diaries, but they were kind of very they 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 weren't kind of they didn't give a lot of information about her life. But there was some information that was available that I could work with. But I figured that because she was I mean, most of her life that she lived in Victoria, she uh she didn't do experimental photography. She was a working photographer, and she actually photographed, at some point she said that she photographed everyone who passed through Victoria. So she was almost like one of the main photographers to go to, which was also amazing because she was a woman working back then. Moreover, she was actually a photographer for the police, for the Victoria Police. And I included a little bit of that in the film. But I figured that because she also she's a surrealist photographer as well, I figured that it would be fitting to make a film that is also surrealist in form, because I wasn't just interested in making a straightforward biopic about a surrealist photographer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I actually wanted the form to reflect that. So that was kind of my thought. Yeah.
Well, it feels so much more authentic to this to the style that
To the style. Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah,
And
you're really
I
right.
love the way that it sort of plays with reality and just the way that it works. This is not a traditional biopic, you know, like usually when we have these people that are brought, it's sort of like, okay, let's find out who they are. This is how they fell in love with this thing. This is how they did it. This is the impact they left, and now and then they died. But this isn't that. This is sort of this. There's an expression in this film that tries to sort of take you in the moment. I think that works so beautifully.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're definitely aiming to do that. Yeah, I wanted to create a almost like a like visceral audio visual experience that you kind of in her head, and it definitely can be uncomfortable at times, and you're kind of stuck there almost from time to time. But yeah, that's what we were going for. Absolutely.
Well,
Hmm.
honestly, it comes across. I wanted to ask you about stillness. I mean, there's several moments where the title matters more. I think in this film where they just say "be still," um, but there's a certain sense of dread throughout the film. I was just wondering, from your perspective, do you think we fear being still, and why, if we do?
That's a really good question. That's no one asked me this question before. Hmm. Well, be still, like that is the actual phrase that they would tell to people back then, because the lenses were like so slow and so basic that if you were not still, it will be a blur. And they had specific like head holders. Um, so that was actually like a very practical thing. I think maybe back then also to me it was the lifestyle, like it was also a little bit slower, but because she was dealing with the loss in her family, that ghost of a daughter that appears and disappears, I think that's to me where like more of that dread comes to. And I think being still potentially also would be like, being more introspective, or like, yeah, introspective, and maybe like analyzing or thinking about what is going on in Hannah's life or in one's life. I think that might feel uncomfortable, especially if you're going through a grieving process. That's that's my thoughts. But an excellent question. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it because honestly, like there's some sort of a meditative spirit to the film in a lot of ways, as every moment feels heavy. Um, and I don't mean that as a criticism at all. I mean that you know you see her moving slowly through the frame and all of this, and it there's this real sense that each moment matters. You're
Hmm.
not always sure what's going on, but you know that it matters.
Yeah, I also, as we were editing, I also was like, yeah, it's okay if we don't know necessarily what's happening right now, but if the sound helps, and and then maybe at the end the bigger picture gives you an idea, like I was okay with that. But that's like, I think also how we look at surrealist, like surrealism. We oftentimes, and it can be more humorous definitely, or more serious, but we're oftentimes not sure what we are looking at, and then it's open to interpretation. And that is also partially what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you a specific line in the film, and just get your thoughts on it. Hannah is speaking to one of the townsfolk. I don't
Yeah.
remember anyway, and there's an argument about truth and photography. And Hannah, they're debating. Oh, well, don't you want to reveal the truth in your photos? And she says truth and photography have a tenuous relationship at best,
Hmm.
which I think is such an interesting line, especially when you're wrestling with somebody who's into surrealist photography. In your mind, though, what do you think that means? What does that line mean to you? And is that the goal, even for you as a filmmaker? Is it to bring truth, or is it to do something else?
I think it's both. Because especially with photography, and I think with filmmaking as well, with photograph, it is literally like less than a second of time. And it's oftentimes, and still it's oftentimes staged, especially back then, right? So does it really represent the truth, or some sort of uh, a type of truth that we want to represent? And I think that's actually has similar to do, it relates actually to the I think social media today.
Mm,
Like, all these profiles of people, I don't know, having a great life and everything looks great. Is it truth, or is it a certain type of truth? So I actually think it's still true to today. But back then, especially, like, you couldn't just snap a picture. You had to go to a studio, dress up, have your head to be held. So that, yeah, so there is that. And also, I think when she was making the experimental photography, I mean, she didn't say that, obviously, it was written. But
yeah.
I hope the idea is that, I don't want to say the truth is out there, but the truth is open to interpretation. Yes. So I think we can read into it, we can interpret it. But I think, yeah, to say that photography is a reflection of absolute truth, I think it's very questionable. Does that
And
make
actually,
sense? Yeah. Does
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to
that make
interrupt.
sense? I don't know.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually, I think it's a great point because, um, like we take a picture of ourselves, and we apply filters, and we make sure our lighting is good, and we do this thing to try and frame an image. Not right, not for me right now. My lighting is bad right now,
Look at my situation. Yes.
but in general, you're absolutely right. With social media, we're doing similar things. We are
Hmm.
framing our reality,
Yeah.
and capturing a moment, but a moment, and I'm using air quotes for a moment, um, to show you a certain aspect of it. Oh, look at how cool this is, or how good I look. When in reality, it's not quite the same. And yeah, I mean, it's you see
Yeah.
that in a story like Hannah's here. The way that you've brought this to life is that these film or these photographs. What is the truth that we're trying to is it the truth we're trying to show, or is it actual truth? This is, like you said, everything's built.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I think these are very interesting questions, and I like the idea that it's not like kind of a dusty past, so to speak. She literally was taking selfies in a way, but it's still like, yeah, like that still relates to today. And actually, the funny part was I didn't include it in the film, but she definitely was a woman. She was already, when she was making these photographs, she was like, well, I think in her 50s. And she actually, at some points, I could tell that she would overexpose her face a little bit. She would put a filter to make it less, but not only that, because it was on glass plate, she actually scraped like where her waist is to make it more.
Really? Well, so she wasn't just the beginnings of surrealist photography. She was the
She
beginnings
she
of
was also
Instagram.
of the gram. There you go. You can put that. Yes. And she had like this, actually, she had a great sense of humor. It was kind of dark, but sometimes how she like looks at things, and it's kind of cheeky a little bit. And yeah, like she would totally scrape, like, so she has more waist. I thought it was hilarious. I didn't know how to include that in the film, but it was there. Not all of her photographs, but some. That's
I can't
amazing.
imagine.
I haven't actually thought about it in a while, but yeah.
That's funny. I can't imagine being in like the 1800s and saying, I could just, scratch this a little bit in here.
Scratch this, right? And
Yeah,
it's like a negative, but like on a glass plate, literally like scrape off a little
that's
bit.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's so good. Uh, Elizabeth, I'm just wondering, what is it that you hope people realize about Hannah from this story, from this film, as we wrap up?
Absolutely. To be perfectly honest, I just hope to bring awareness that this person existed, like on a even just on a fundamental level. And as you said, like, why haven't we heard about her before? Um, but yeah, and to bring awareness that there were pioneer female photographers, and that um, and also hopefully to show that, like, it was very important for me to stay creative with the feature lengths form, because I actually made about 15 short films, which is a lot. And it took me like all these years. It's after Me Too, actually, that there was at least some interest to tell Hannah's stories, because as I told you, like I wanted to make it for 20 years. And up until then, every time I would pitch it, people would tell me straightforward that there's no interest for stories like this one.
Mm.
So I've heard that for like about 15 years. Sorry, where was I going with this? Yeah, it's I so I made like I didn't want to quit being a filmmaker. So I made all these 15 shorts, and most of my work has kind of experimental edge to it. And I just wanted to make sure also that as I continue to experiment as I go not switch, I still make shorts right now, but like as I turn to the feature films. And I think there's almost like there's like this fear to be more cinematically adventurous when it comes to feature films, because I guess there's more funding involved. But that tendency for safety, I think, in feature films often leads to, being less adventurous. I think it almost feels like to less interesting work. So it was important for me to continue doing, and I hope also that people can see that for example, the biopic genre, I had a hard time finding something like this. Like I had a hard time to find a reference for something that I wanted to do, especially in biopics. I couldn't actually. But there's so many ways to discuss and to bring persons, inner world to the screen to tell their stories. I think there's so much to explore yet, and I think sound to me is as important as visuals, and I made sure to incorporate it here. So yeah, so I hope to bring awareness about Hannah, and also to say it's okay to experiment, be adventurous. I think hopefully you might like or not like the film, but at least I think potentially you will see a different perspective, maybe something that you haven't necessarily seen before.
I appreciate that so much, and certainly this film is that. It's definitely adventurous, and such a unique project. Thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you so much
appreciate
for
it.
your time. It's great speaking with you.
Absolutely, it's been wonderful speaking with you too. Have a great day.
You too.